Assalamu alaikum everyone. Thank you for joining us today. Welcome from Xenith Impacts. Xenith Impacts is an initiative of Xenith Public Relations, which focuses on social, environmental, and cultural sustainability. We want to talk to change makers and change enablers of Pakistan and talk about how we can build a sustainable future for the country together. This episode is a part of a 3-series episode, which has been partnered with Philip Morris Pakistan Limited. For this episode, we want to focus on what the future of sustainability in Pakistan looks like, what is the kind of future we want to build for the country as well, and what can we do to get to a greener future for the generations that come after us. With me are 3 people that I adore. I have known some of them for a very long time. I'm really excited to be here with them. I'll start off with Ammar. Ammar is the CEO of Mywater. He is passionate about water conservation and again a sustainable future for the country. Then we have Afia Salam, who I've known, I think, perhaps the longest. She's a mentor to me. She's a journalist. She's a vocal activist. She's a change enabler and a change maker herself. She is very vocal about environmental protection, environmental sustainability in Pakistan. Then we have Dr. Ashar with us. He is a consultant rheumatologist with the Ziauddin Group of Hospitals. He's spent 17 years in the UK, heading the Southport Hospital as Director of Medicine. He has just recently moved back to the country, to his hometown, Karachi. His field of interest is leadership and management in the field of medicine. Thank you all for coming. Thank you for doing this on such short notice as well. And thank you for putting up with the noise pollution that we have going on behind us as well. Just to start off with, maybe I'll start off with Ammar. There's a lot of studies that are coming out which are saying that it's already too late for a sustainable future. Do you think that's true, or do we still have time?
In my opinion, we're not too late, right? But we also don't have too much time. Unlike developed countries who have means to sort of pay for the procrastination, developing countries do not have that luxury, right? If there is an earthquake, if there is a flood, if there is any kind of, natural disaster which is related to global warming and environmental, problems, we have to sort of bear with it, right? And we don't have the means. Developing countries don't have the means. So even though it's not too late, but we don't have time to sort of go down the learning curve that most developing countries are going through right now.
Right. That makes sense. Afia, your thoughts on this?
So, if you say is it too late, so that means we should not be existing anymore. But in the climate change environment context and in that conversation, there have been many tipping points that were forewarned. We've passed those. So it's not as if that no damage has been done. A lot of damage has been. We've lost many species. There are so many things that we cannot really recover anymore. But if we say it's too late, so that means that we will be very fatalistic and we will not be taking any action. So I will not go down that route. There are things that need to be done even now to stop it from being worse. So that's
that makes
how it
sense.
is.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Dr. Ashar, your thoughts on this?
Well, I agree with my esteemed colleague guests over here, and I think I'm forever the optimist, and it would be very sad state of affairs if we thought that things are too late. And obviously, that is a view that is sometimes propagated in the media. But we should stay positive and be a positive force for change. Now, if you put things into perspective, since the Earth obviously came into existence about 4.5 billion years ago, there's been climate change. Now, for millennia, that used to happen because of natural reasons, because of volcanic eruptions, tectonic plate shifts, and change in the orbit. But since the Industrial Revolution in the 1800s, that's when the human impact has been there, mainly because of emission of the greenhouse gases. And the main sources are the human activities. So I think any challenge brings with it great opportunities. I think humans as a species have got we owe it to our future generations to do something about it. I mean, the recently concluded climate conference in Glasgow, a lot of people criticize that they haven't done enough, but at least it brought some sort of consensus and some sort of commitment from global governments to bring about some change. And you always hope for the best. If things continue the way they are, then we're expected to see a rise of about 2.4 degrees Celsius by the end of this century, which means that countries like Bangladesh and Vietnam will be completely submerged. Pakistan will have a existential crisis as far as agriculture and crop failures and wildfires are concerned. So it's not too late, but it's an emergency, and something has to be done now. It's a clear and present danger.
It is quite jarring to hear this, though, that we are a century away. Some studies say we are closer, some studies say we are further, but I think there is consensus that we are quite, like Ammar said, we are quite close to the point where now we can't go down a learning curve path. There are things we need to do and the things we need to do fast. Dr. Saab, you mentioned you're an optimist. What's, let's say, 10 years down the road, what's a sustainable Pakistan image in your head? What is it that you would like to see?
Well, I think to understand the future, we also cannot ignore what's been done before. So I would say that since 2018, the Pakistan government has signed an agreement with the UN, which is a sustainable development framework, which is essentially a medium-term framework to bring about sustainable change. And that's led to development of sustainable development units at federal as well as provincial levels. And, I'm always heartened to see that the current government, especially our Prime Minister, seems to be an issue that is close to his heart also. I mean, we've heard about the billion tree tsunami, but as a developing country, and I think this may come up later in the talk as well, we have got unique challenges. So on one hand, we're trying to plant trees. On the other hand, we're reliant on industries such as coal as well as cement. Now, we know that the cement, the production of cement worldwide contributes 2% to the global greenhouse emission. But can we do away with all the cement plants? We can't. So I think our challenges are unique, but at least as long as the change is in the right direction, and of course it's not going to be a revolution. It's going to be an evolution, and the change has to be incremental with some sense of urgency. But I see a bright future for Pakistan. I see that if the present policies continue, there should be more use of renewable source of energy, less reliance on fossil fuels, water conservation, which is close to your heart, obviously, and then waste management. And I think all of us have got a role to play.
Afia, since I've known you since more or less 2010, I believe, probably. I've known you to talk about an environmentally sustainable future. What is that future for you? What is that future that you want to see in Pakistan for the generations ahead of us, for your grandchildren as well?
Okay, so there you're talking of hopes and desires, and we're talking also of the realities. So for one thing, the Sustainable Development Goals were actually signed on by the previous government in 2015. That's when it kicked in. So that is something Pakistan has signed on to. It's not about the government. And so that has to be continued. Till to 2030, we have several targets to meet. We failed in the targets which we had signed on to in the Millennium Development Goals. So this is the step up. This is like you give a supplementary paper after failing your exam. But this is not really a light conversation because things are quite bad. Many of the actions, they need to be fast-tracked. The policies that have been announced, they are at variance with each other. To cite just one, because of the greenhouse gas and the commitments to reduce emissions, we've got the electronic vehicle policy. We've also got some charging stations that have been inaugurated and a lot of fanfare. But we've also given license to a couple of car makers, which are going to be the conventional cars.
Sure.
So where are we going with this?
Yeah.
So these. And then you mentioned coal. It's a very difficult pill to swallow that we have to use coal, and especially indigenous coal. But the point is that where are the foreign exchange reserves to buy something else? So these are these difficult realities that countries like ours have to navigate. It's not this easy solution, which, like you mentioned, that there are countries which have the luxury of implementing some solutions just like this. They cause the problems. unless and until there is this equitable, giving of the benefits of whatever actions are being taken, I don't see us going through on a good development path. Our people, the ones who are going to benefit from the kind of policies, they are still the upper crust. It is not the people. I've just come back after 6-7 days in the field. I've been in the coastal regions. How the coastal communities are, already facing the impacts. So climate change for Pakistan is not something that is going to happen. It has already taken place. The impacts are already being felt by communities. And we are, like I mentioned, one of the most vulnerable countries. So the development path we need to be on is not just because we signed on to certain treaties and we have to, fulfill those, but it is we have to see those fruits of development reach right down to the communities. I still don't see that happening. Despite these big projects, the big ticket items, until and unless they benefit everybody equally,
Right.
it's not really fair.
That is very interesting. Ammar, moving to you. What's the sustainable future of Pakistan that you would like to see or that you foresee for us in the next 10 years?
So, 10 years is pretty quick, right? It comes and goes, right? I always like to sort of, when I look at, when I was back in the US, I lived in China for a little bit, and there were these, different policies in place to, nobody would pay more and buy a more expensive solar panel unless there were subsidies, tax rebates. America did that. China does that, right? So one thing that, like my friend here mentioned, that, there are some policies that are being looked at, and I'm hopeful that, some of them will come into play where it provides an economic benefit for an individual or a company, right? That's step one. Without providing an economic feasibility, nobody will want to recycle. Nobody will want to, or unless you sort of have regulations that penalize people, right? We have laws in place. They're not just enforced. So having laws and enforcement is another challenge. I think the more interesting solution would be to sort of incentivize being green, right? You give out tax rebates to people, you give out discounts, you give out various different things, right? So I'm hopeful that the government is going to sort of at least understand that and try to do something different than the same old the big ticket item projects, because they just don't work. It's a political stunt, and it just doesn't work. So in 10 years, I'm hopeful that we will at least focus on two things that are immediate and that are, cheap to solve, or not cheap, but cheaper to solve. One is water conservation, right? It could be wastewater, industrial waste going into the ocean. It could be sewage waste going into the ocean. And number two is solid waste management. Burning of waste anywhere you go. There's smog. There's plastic everywhere. So I think these two things are manageable to at least attack at a significant level in a 10 years time.
That's very interesting. So that begs a question. Given the scenarios and the policies that we all speak about, that at a government level is being spoken about, is being implemented to some degree, there are signings that we are doing at a global level as well. Keeping that in mind, what's the kind of weightage you give for Pakistan in particular? What's the weightage of importance or responsibility you would see or you would shoulder between three subsets of the populace, right? You have your governments, you have your companies, and you have your individuals. What's the kind of percentage balance you're seeing between the three of them in your mind that would enable a sustainable future? And I agree, 10 years goes by in a wink, but 10 years, let's say, is all we have to start taking concrete actions. So how would you rank the balance between these three groups? Where would you place the most balance, and where would you put the less amount of responsibility?
The typical answer to that would be more responsibility towards the government, right? But, we've been doing that. A lot of developing countries do that, right? Okay, it's the government's responsibility to sort of give us funding to build roads. And yes, it is. It definitely is. But again, there are challenges of the government. There are a lot of geopolitical things going on. There are politics involved, and especially in democracies, right? It would be very easy for UAE to ban single-use plastic because it's there is no. I mean, they just have to pass a law that this is good for the country, and everybody has. I mean, and it is good for the country. Here, you can't. There are federal laws, and especially challenges of Sindh and Karachi itself, which is the largest, try passing a law of any sort, right? There are a lot of intricacies within the city, and plastics, solid waste, water, tankers. I mean, it is, but at certain level, the government has to have some responsibility. But there is also weightage to corporates, companies, and individuals, right? And that could be a result of just startups or new initiatives or new, companies building products that are sustainable, that can, do cost savings. And there is cost savings. For example, if you think about in terms of water, if there is and there are many cheap solutions available around the world, that you put up a very small wastewater system in your home to recycle your water for your gardens, right? You could even, the water becomes so clean, you could use it back in your bathrooms. America does that. I used to live in Los Angeles. 60% of water in the bathrooms was recycled, right? So you could do that on a micro level. On a macro level, that would be the government being involved, and that there goes your 10-year plan, right?
Right.
So you have to figure out in a unique way of how to sort of decentralize these incentives to at least start creating, a movement or sort of an incentive to incur change.
Absolutely, that makes sense. Afia, same question. Given the environment that we're in and the realities that we see as residents of Karachi as well as citizens of the country, and what we have seen happening repeatedly time and again over, let's say, the last 3-4 decades, where would you place hope?
So I wouldn't put it, in a weightage paradigm, because unless and until there are synergies, it won't work. Because where the government has carte blanche, it hasn't performed. Where companies have carte blanche within their own area, they don't perform. As individuals, like you say, you have to incentivize some things. So the English adage of carrot and stick, it was crafted for a reason. It works. Somewhere a carrot, somewhere a stick. Now, I also would like to slightly disagree with some of the examples, because yes, UAE is authoritarian, and if they say something, and it will be implemented. And yes, democracy is messy and it's slow and it's confrontational, etc. Yet, if you see the countries, there are countries which are not authoritarian, yet they are democratic, and they've been able to do it. So there's no reason why we can't go down that route and improve ourselves, and not always give the excuse that yahan nahi ho sakta. We are too lazy, we are too corrupt. We are not. We are the same people. We haven't come from Mars. So we have the capacity to improve where it has happened. It has given the dividends. The governments and the corporates have to work at the UN Climate Change Conference, which was held in Paris. There was one special segment which was called NMM, New Market Mechanisms for Climate Change. And those market mechanisms spoke about the inclusion of the private sector. You cannot just exclude the private sector, which you see as a problem, that they are the polluters. But hello, you need to get the polluters on your side and see that the systems change, so they are no longer polluters. You cannot just alienate them and by shifting all the blame on them. So this has happened. We've seen the conversation gone to a certain level that within our own country, there are industries now who have a closed loop production, who are going towards net zero, which again is a new buzzword, but still, that is some progress. So the failure of the COPs to cut emissions is Yes, it's very obvious that from the time the COP started, one of our colleagues, a leading Pakistani environmental lawyer, Afia Salam, gave that figure. And it's like an eye-opener that the world emission graph has started going up from the time the UN climate change conference has been happening. This is the 26th year. And in the past 26 years, every succeeding year is a hotter than the previous one, and the emissions are growing. But on the sidelines, there are many other things that have happened. People have recognized the need for financial, inclusion, for financial support of countries which do not have the finances to be able to adapt to the disaster or even to mitigate if they are the polluters. So this is not something where we can isolate a segment of the population or segment of anybody and an industry or a government. Say, this is your responsibility. You clean up the mess. Because the individuals are also creating a mess. So they have to be incentivized not to. I totally agree. Tax rebates, incentives, you could have a clean house, even, a validation or a praise, a public praise, does a lot to motivate others to do the same.
Instant gratification as well at play, right?
Absolutely.
Utilize
So,
that as
these
well.
things have worked elsewhere. I really don't see why they can't work here. So, I'm not losing hope on that count. I'm just saying that we need to sort of accelerate what we are doing.
Right.
We don't have a lot of time. We don't have the luxury, like you said, of being on that learning curve. We've been there long enough.
That makes sense. Dr. Ashar Saab, where would you place hope?
Well, I mean, just like what Afia and Ammar have said already, I mean, I like to keep things very simple. I think it's a shared future, so it's a shared responsibility between corporate, between governments, between individuals. Of course, when, like Ammar's mentioned, the governments have got the financial muscle and the power to bring about policies and to implement those policies. So that is where the strength lies. But we have known that governments have procrastinated for a long time, and scientists have known about climate change. They've been advising, but the governments, just for their own convenience, have ignored it for a long time as well. So that is where the responsibility of individuals comes in, to hold your government to account. And we've seen, individuals like Greta Thunberg, young lady, and she's made a huge difference. So, an individual voice does carry a lot of weight. And when we talk about corporates, of course, there is a big corporate social responsibility, which is to the employees, which is to the welfare of their employees, to the society that they're operating in, and then to the environment, of course. And increasingly, investors, mutual funds, investment trusts, they are judging companies based on their ESG credentials, and which is where your example of carrot and stick comes in, because if you don't do it, then there's a stick. And if you do something, then that's where Ammar's incentive comes in, because, the stock value will go down. So, so this is where the interests get aligned. So I think it's a shared responsibility. It's very difficult to put a weightage, but I think everybody has to play their part.
Absolutely. That makes a lot of sense. Thoughts on what at an individual level can we start doing today, that we need to start doing today, to even justify having a conversation, let's say 2 years, 3 years down the road, the government hasn't done something, the corporate sector hasn't done something. But at an individual level, what are drastic steps that we can take from today, that we need to take from today? I'll obviously start with Ammar here, because of his line of work as well, puts him in that area as well. If you could talk us through that, what do you think about that?
Well, I have a personal vendetta against plastics, right? So I'm just going to speak to that, and that's something you can start today. Plastic water bottles, plastic bags, anything that you can't reuse, right? That shouldn't be used. That's something you can start from tomorrow. Go to the grocery store, take a cloth bag, even though cloth bags have a huge carbon footprint, but still you can reuse them, right? Plastic water bottles, you go to events, don't have them, carry your own bottle, just be sort of aware on, because those plastics, especially in countries like Pakistan, they don't find a way out. There is no recycling program. There is no, they find their way in the ocean. And that's the most immediate impact, much faster than global warming can do, So my quick and dirty method would be just sort of stop using single-use plastics.
Fair enough. Afia, your thoughts?
So I have a problem with single-use anything, not just plastic. So, this throwaway culture, using it once, going for new, the trendy stuff, etc. That is having a huge impact on. So our consumptive behavior is actually what we need to scale back, and that is at an individual level. But also, just allow me to just elaborate on that. There's something called drawdown. It was an international project. And like we say, let's go back to the old ways, because some of the older ways were more sustainable. You mentioned cloth bag. That's an old way, right? There are many old ways which are thrifty, which are more environment friendly. And Drawdown was in an international project which was identifying actions on a bigger scale, which if you scale back some of the things that you're doing now and go back, so the footprint reduces, the carbon footprint reduces. And we had a Pakistani consultant on that project as well. She, Majubeen Abdi Habib, her name is. And you will find there's a publication, there's a website. And if you go on it, those are such simple fixes and very, very commonsensical, That is what we look for complicated solutions. There are some very simple solutions. Don't use plastic. Don't throw things away. Don't be messy. Don't cut trees. Those are simple things. So, and when you talk about them, they don't sound important enough probably, and people are looking for complicated solutions, but that's not really the way we need to go forward.
Right. So just to follow up on that, and I think this question goes for both of you in particular as well. You guys speak about consumption habits and changing consumption habits. It's a very catch-22 situation at the same time, isn't it? Because it's very easy for people to turn around and say, oh, my environment is not conducive for me to recycle stuff, or it's not conducive for me to reuse stuff or to not use single-use devices. You need an ecosystem as well. So there is a natural catch-22 situation at play where until people start using those items is when the corporations will wake up and start delivering on those. So how do you see the catch-22 situation solving, right? So you can take micro steps at our level, at individual levels. How do you foresee an industry shift to come out of this at the rate of change that's taking place that we see right now? Which is slowish, on the slower side.
So again, I'll sound like a broken record. There are things happening, they need to happen faster. The plastic in our system is now being picked up, is being recycled, not at the scale that it is being produced. So you have to look at both ends, the supply and demand. The demand for plastic needs to stop. And I mean by demand for plastic, I mean the single-use throwable plastic. Plastic is an invention of immense value and of immense use. So I'm not saying throw everything that is plastic. Just don't throw them in the system. They are being picked up and they are being recycled into other products. That's okay. Similarly, there are other things. You grow trees for cutting them. You don't cut trees which are not for cutting. So people still need fuel wood. They need firewood. I know that it sounds very nice when you see to point fingers at people who are cutting trees and taking it, taking it to the communities.
Absolutely.
But
for the basic
choice do you
needs
have?
as well.
Have you provided them gas? Have you provided them an alternate? Have you provided them anything, to cook with solar? They need to cook food twice a day. They need to keep warm in the winters. So there are alternates unless and until you provide them. The demand will be there. So to plug the demand, you need to first provide an alternate. If to plug the demand, for sustainable transport, you need to supply the transport and then put a ban on other vehicles. You cannot say ki gaadiyan band kar do.
Right.
Where are the buses for us to travel on? We give examples of Singapore. Yes, they reduce cars. But look at. You don't need your car over there. The system has been put in place first. Our stick comes first. The carrot comes.
Yeah.
So that is the flip we need to make.
Right.
It is doable. Also, I don't agree that it is catch-22 is because it has been done. It is being done elsewhere. And I keep coming back to the same thing that if others can do it, we have models, we can do it as well. We just need to sort of, focus and realize the urgency of doing these things.
Absolutely. Ammar, your thoughts on this? You are in that line of business as well.
Yeah. So I would echo the same sort of tone that the supply needs to come first, and I think the demand is there. I truly believe no matter what country you're in, even Pakistan, if you have two choices in front of you, right, and they both are the same cost, same brand, same cost, same everything, and one is greener, right? You will 50% of the chance you'll probably choose the greener product, right? Nobody's going to pay more for being green. That's the problem that the industry had. That nobody's going to pay a premium. You have to focus on making them equal. If it's cheaper, 100% of the time, right? It's not even so. You have the industry, companies, products have to focus on creating the supply, and the supply will be created by this. And once the supply is created, demand is there. People do want to, go green. They just don't want to pay extra for it, right? Or go through an extra hassle. And so it's just you just have to incentivize consumers by natural laws of economics. There's no rocket science here.
That's interesting though, because for the longest time growing up, we were told repeatedly that change has to be an inconvenience as well. The change will inevitably feel like an inconvenience. What's interesting to see that in a bid to save the world, we have to look at making change convenient first. That's an interesting shift from the time, at least.
Yeah. One more, sorry, Rahil, one more note that if you look at any solar company around the world, any solar company, right? The way they acquire their customers, they will never use the word go green, right? It's always about saving money. Save money every month. Stop paying your utility bills. In Karachi, everybody who put a solar panel in couldn't care less about, but they will end up saving a lot of money.
But it's the cost factor at the end of the day, at the end of the month that helps them.
Even though they're expensive systems,
right?
But the cost savings are so high that they'll wait 5 years for an ROI.
Right.
I mean, who is going to wait 5 years for an ROI in Pakistan, right? Or any consumer product? But
Absolutely.
And that's how you have to position the supply. The demand will come.
Absolutely. And that's kind of been the underlying solution, so to speak, that we've been talking about this evening, is instant gratification, instant verification, validation as well, is what the need of the hour is. Coming to Dr. Ashar Sahab, if you can talk about recycling opportunities within the medical field. I know you've been a medical director for 6 years in the UK. Where do you see medical recycling going in Pakistan in particular as well?
Medical waste is a big issue all over the world. I think it's a big issue. Obviously, developed countries handle these things in a better, more sustainable way. Whereas our waste probably, there are policies, but the waste ends up everywhere. I think it's a big issue. I mean, you were talking about the pace of change, and I think the last couple of years with the pandemic, which has been a human tragedy, things have changed at such a rapid pace that, from a healthcare angle, I would like to say that pollution, causes so many problems like lung cancer, obstructive airway disorders, stroke, the risk of stroke, the risk of having a heart attack. But then what we have seen during the pandemic is that people have adopted new ways. So obviously we've talked about waste management, we've talked about water management, but there is something to be said about travel and the associated greenhouse gases. So there's an opportunity to travel less. And from the medical experience, I can say that previously if I had to go to a medical conference, I would have to take a flight, go to Europe or America or somewhere and spend 2 or 3 days. Pretty wasteful financially as well as, from an environment perspective. Now you can get a better value for money from your home. Same, obviously you miss out on the social side of things, that is an aspect, but there are so many opportunities and so many new ways of working have to be adopted. Hospital waste management is a big issue. I think we have so much that can be done here. I'm just learning as I go along over here. I've only been back in Pakistan working for about 3 months, so still, for me it's a learning curve. But over there things are very much streamlined. So for example, but even in developed countries, for example, what they saw in one study was 95% of the waste that they were throwing away as infected waste was just general waste from theaters. Okay. So by changing that, they were able to make a big savings. And this is where the incentive thing comes in as well. That if you make changes that are in the long run better for the environment, because the infected waste has to be processed in a different way, which is not as environmentally friendly as a general waste. from the hospital. So just by monitoring that, auditing that little thing, they were able to make an impact on their bottom line, obviously, as well as the environment. So there are so many opportunities everywhere. I mean, hospital waste is just one area, but there are so many other examples everywhere.
Right. But just to build up on that, so in your experience, like we were just talking about change being convenient, have you felt the medical aspect of it, the medical warning that comes with a deteriorating environment or a non-sustainable environment? Have you felt that it's compelling enough for people to change their ways, or are we going back, or is this a universal fact that change now for the generations ahead of us has to be convenient?
I mean, look, I think there are some things that are going to inevitably happen, right? Some things that are inevitably going to happen, and some things that are going to be inconvenient, but then they will pay off in the longer run. So, for example, if I share with you some examples from healthcare, I brought some figures with me, which if you allow me to quote, examples of good practices where it's been a win-win situation, right? So it doesn't always have to be inconvenient. It can be a win-win situation also. So, for example, England's National Health Service Sustainable Development Unit is a prominent example of best practice, whereby over a period of 10 years, they were able to reduce healthcare-related emissions by 18.5% and water usage by 21%, which provided a successful example. Then, across the pond in the US, the Memorial Hermann healthcare system saved $47 million over a period of 5 years by implementing energy efficiencies. If you look at the University of Arkansas figures for medical sciences, they saved enough money through efficiency efforts from just one project that they were able to create 60 new beds, remodel 5 operating suites, build out a floor of Cancer Institute, and buy 7 acres of land. And then Kaiser Permanente, which you may have heard of in the US, it's a big healthcare group. It made a saving of $4 million a year by purchasing energy efficient, environmentally responsible computers. So $4 million a year is a recurring saving. So this is where the interests are aligned, and this is where the incentives come in, because if you can do things that are better for the environment, better for, a better environment means better health, of course.
Sure.
And then the corporate profits are aligned, and that is a win-win situation in my mind, and that is the way forwards.
That makes a lot of sense. Did you want to add something? It felt like you were going to.
Yeah, well, I mean, when he spoke about the bottom line, so this is why now nobody looks at the bottom line, they look at the triple bottom line. And the triple bottom line addresses your environmental sustainability as well as your social sustainability. And that is how the corporates are able to build their profile. Because, you see, at the end of the day, for individuals, corporates, and the governments, they are answering one question for themselves: what's in it for me? So the corporates, they want investors, they want their share prices to rise. If they are addressing the triple bottom line, that's what's there for them. Similarly, governments want validation of their work. They want a perpetuation in maybe the next election cycle, etc. So what's in it for them? If they do good, that's there for them. And as well, similarly for individual, if you have these good practices, if your health is better, if your living environment is better, if you're having access to clean water, that's what's in it for them. So everybody asks that question, whenever they're doing anything. What's in it for me? Why should I do something better than what I'm doing right now? That is inconvenient. I agree. Change is inconvenient. But that is inconvenient up to a certain point when that change becomes a norm. So we have to actually, that's like a goal. When you want it to be a norm. Clean drinking water has to become a norm. Right now it is inconvenient. It is expensive to provide clean drinking water to everybody. So that kind of a thing, that again, still it is a curve. But like I said, accelerate, for heaven's sake, we don't have a lot of time.
Absolutely.
People are dying.
You mentioned this earlier in our conversation about climate change not being just in its effect. So not being fair in its effect. There are different stratas of populace with varied impacts of global warming. Of changes in the environment. Diversity and inclusion, saying that in the same sentence as environment sustainability, does it feel like it's too many keywords that we're using in the same sentence because it sounds nice, or it's something that we desperately need now?
There are some words which become buzzwords, but they have a lot of reason why they were coined. And diversity inclusion is also one of those words. This net zero I mentioned is also one of the words which is being looked at as a buzzword, but there are reasons why they were made. Diversity is very important because of the disproportionate impacts of climate change on people. It will impact the richer people less because they have the financial resilience to bounce back. And for the vulnerable population, those same chances are not there. If there is a flood, who will bounce back first? Somebody who has the means to build back their house again if it was damaged. But for people whose house was swept away with everything that they owned, where will they get the wherewithal from to build it back? So, and in a social setup, in a stratified society, there are some segments which are always more vulnerable. Your differently abled are more vulnerable than somebody who is not. The elderly are more vulnerable than the youth. The children are more vulnerable. And then there are some social segments, like in our society, especially in certain segments of society, the women are definitely more vulnerable. A, because of their social status. 2, because of the lesser focus on their health. They are a reproductive being who are reproducing almost all their reproductive life. So they are not as physically strong to be able to maybe run when the floods are coming. Their nutrition level is not the same as the males. So I'm not talking of a male versus female kind of a thing. These are the realities which all indicators will, validate. So they are more vulnerable. That is why I'm saying that the disproportionate impact is there. And similarly, then there are countries. So you talk from individual level, and then there are countries like who have more resources. They will bounce back very fast. But where will Maldives go when the water, has inundated it? So they can't go live underwater. So this is the impact of disproportionate impact. And there was the conversation about the differentiated responsibility as well. But now we know that the countries which are responsible for kicking in and exacerbating climate change bear a greater responsibility than a country like ours, which is not contributing so much. So
no, absolutely. I think one of my key takeaways from this conversation is the term social is sustainable justice as well. I think that's definitely a term that is jarring as well. It is not something that is usually at the top of people's head. It's also generational activities that have put us at that disadvantage. Well, so it was something for the longest time that was taken for granted. And it is interesting to note that even though we might not be that big a contributor to that issue, we have to be right up there to come up with a solution. And like Ammar mentioned at the start of the conversation, developing countries like Pakistan, for instance, do not have the luxury of time and resource to experiment, to think about things. We need to get into action mode fast. Dr. Saab, if I were to ask you the same question, diversity, inclusion, and eco-sustainability.
So I will tackle this from a workplace angle. Mm-hmm. So equality, diversity, inclusivity in the workplace. It's a big issue. And does it affect societies? Does it affect environment? Of course, because it's all about stakeholder involvement. Now, in the US, there was a study which I came across, which showed that the most polluted neighborhoods were the ones where people had a lower socioeconomic status and were of a colored background. Now that tells you something. Now, if those people had representation on the boards of the companies which are contributing, and if those people had a say, and if the workplace or if the workplace was representative of that populace, then that probably would not have happened. So this is where inclusivity, be it gender, be it racial, be it linguistic, there's so many different areas. Inclusivity, diversity, equality. This is where it comes in because it gives people a voice. It makes them a stakeholder. And it makes the company's social responsibility teams accountable to them. And then they make these decisions keeping their views into mind.
Absolutely. Ammar, same question though. Diversity and inclusion in a sustainable environment of the future. Where do you see that? How important do you think that factor is?
It's very important because obviously like we all agree, I agree with the points made here that climate change is also biased, right? It doesn't sort of target the polluters and the non-polluters get away, right? And even within that scope, it's the people who are the most vulnerable who don't have means to sort of figure out alternatives. A very good example, just sort of echoing what my friend here said. On another example, I read a last week. I was going through. I do some I do some battery research as well. One of our companies, we do some electric car battery research, and there, in an electric battery or in a battery, there are two major components: lithium and cobalt, right? The largest country in the world that produces as a mines is the DRC, Democratic Republic of Congo, right? And I mean, they're the largest reserves, right? And a lot of companies have left Congo because, or the mining companies have left Congo because they couldn't, the government, I think from all the exports that they did, only 2 or 3% came back to the government to spend back in the environment, right? So the weird sort of thought process is here on one hand, you're trying to go electric, everybody is trying to go electric, but the batteries are made from these, these sort of metals that are in a country which is completely, isolated from any kind of governance, right? And the pollution that creates water and smog and air and accidents. So it's very important for not only these green technologies and this eco-friendlyism to sort of take the right steps in the right direction, but they also have an inherent responsibility to be sustainable, right? You can't make the world's greatest battery that will have the largest charge. It will save the planet, but it will destroy the planet first, right? So there is no planet to save. So that's the from a I have that angle from a product and from a company standpoint, because that's what diversity and the inclusion creates, because you will benefit consumers with electric cars at the cost of people living close to those mines.
Right. So again, it's the same thing. People who are not necessarily causing the damage are getting damaged the most themselves in return, right? So it's that, again, it comes back, like I said, that's one word that'll stay with me for a very long time. That is sustainable justice.
May I give an example here?
Please.
A very simple one, which all of us have seen. So we've run out of gas now, but some years earlier, Pakistan was the second largest country in the world for the use of CNG. And we had this whole array of new CNG stations, spanking new CNG stations all across our highways. And they would have all these lights on, to attract their customers. And what was powering those lights? The furnace oil burning power stations, the normal light. So they were promoting CNG as a green, clean fuel while setting up the whole infrastructure on furnace oil based. So this is something, that we have to question. That if you promote one thing at the cost of something else, very rightly pointed out by him. And also one big issue over there was the child labor involved in those mines. So, I mean, when you're talking about triple bottom line and inclusion and diversity, you have to see the social impact, the environmental impact, not just the, if you're in the red or in the black.
Absolutely. That makes sense. Final two questions. If you got to ask one thing from the government tomorrow, around environmental sustainability, and you knew that's going to be accepted now, what is that one thing you would ask the government? Remember, you have to be specific. It's one thing you can ask. It's not a genie and I'll ask for 10 more wishes. So it's the government after all. Dr. Saab, if you want to start there.
Okay, it's a difficult one. I mean, if you're just giving one option, because I think of things as a cycle, you see. I would want the government to make a commitment and then create a culture of eco-friendliness, and then, of course, put some funding behind those initiatives, and then have some targets and then measure performance against those targets, and then of course promote good practice and share some success stories and look for better opportunities and repeat the cycle again. That's the way I see things. I don't know if I can say that I just want one thing.
Fair enough. Afidi.
Okay, that's an easy one actually. Because there are many things the government has signed on to. Fulfill them, enforce them. You've got the laws, you've got commitments, you've got treaties, you've got MOUs, fulfill them. All those things are quite on point.
Fair
We
enough.
need to just see
Fair
them enforced.
Right. So come true on the promises already made,
Yeah,
essentially.
absolutely.
Makes sense. Ammar?
I would start by looking at Karachi as an example, right? Again, waste management and water conservation, just water recycling, right? Not very expensive, very immediate. Just take the streams of waste going in, treat the water, put the water back into the lines at least, take care of all the horticulture, the greenery, and stop bleeding all the water that comes in from the lakes and the geels. 30% of it gets into the city, right? So you have stop those losses,
Right.
and at least efficiently distribute water around the city, so that people don't make those decisions that are hurtful in the long term. And again, adding that to solid waste management as well, which I mean, it's not solid waste management I've seen in Lahore, in other countries, in cities in Punjab. They do it. I mean, it's not like it's not happening in Pakistan, but for some reason, it has always failed in Karachi from an implementation standpoint. So once we start seeing these initiatives, at least small ones, if a consumer sees the garbage is going out in a cleaner way, I don't see the garbage I put out, it doesn't smell or whatever, then people start getting into that mode. Okay, let me just see what else I can do,
Right.
because I see some initiative by the government.
Absolutely. That makes sense. One final question that I have to ask, and then we'll wrap it up. What's that one initiative, government, corporate, individual level, that you desperately hope is that you see in the year 2022? What is that one initiative? Afia, if we can start with you.
I think environmental sustainability, these two words may be a buzzword again, but they encompass so many actions, and there are so many drivers to it, that if we just focus for 1 year, you will see the change it makes in the systems, in the living space, in the environment, in your health, everything. So one has to start thinking on those lines and then try implement, because like I said, hope is not a strategy. I want to move beyond hope, and I want to see these things being done, because they can be done and they are being done elsewhere, and we must also.
Absolutely. And this is something that I still say, and I've been saying this for the longest time, that hope might be the culprit at the end of the day behind our laziness as well. Our laziness to act with the urgency that is required. Dr. Sam, what's that one initiative you would like to see?
I mean, if I had to choose one, I would say maybe less reliance on fossil fuels, as soon as possible, as a matter of urgency, and more renewable sources of energy which are cleaner for the environment, and of course, we owe it to our future generations.
Absolutely. Ammar?
I would just in a year, I would like to see Pakistanis all around, and people all around the globe, like normal consumers, start thinking about their surroundings a little bit more. Treat your street or your city like you would treat your living room or your home, right? Once you start having that ownership, you start automatically. People don't pollute their homes, right? They don't throw stuff around their house. They throw it outside, right? Somebody will take care of it. So I would, I'd like to see some sort of ownership on an individual consumer level, that this is a problem. What I'm trying to do, this is not going to go away. It's going away from my side, but this is hurting my home in some way. So that kind of awareness is something that I hope gets instilled into normal consumers around the world, not only Pakistan, just globally.
Absolutely. Wow. Thank you so much, everyone, for coming again. It has been an absolute pleasure having you guys for this episode. I'm so grateful for you guys for sharing your wisdom, your thoughts, your patience as well, and for being a part of this. I hope and I pray that the year 2022 has the promises that we have hopes for, and I really hope that as a result of this conversation and the million other conversations that are happening now around the world, there is tangible promise of a change that we can start seeing almost instantly, not just for us but for the generations that are coming after us. Thank you once again,
Thank you for
everyone.
having us.
So thank you very much
Thank
for
you so
having
much.
us.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Have a good evening. Thank you guys. Thank you
Thank
for
you.
watching.